3 wagon trains, 3 nightmares. 1871. Kiowa chiefs raid, leaving bodies behind. 1864. A peaceful camp turns to slaughter, a mother captured. 1860. Ambushes force settlers to devour their kin. Across the West, hope met horror. Why did these attacks erupt? The story's darker than you think. In May 1871, Henry Warren, a U.S. government contractor, took on a routine job, hauling corn and livestock feed to military outposts in western Texas. His crew of 12 men guided 10 mule-drawn wagons along the Jaboro-Belknap Road, a direct route considered safe for travel. Loaded with supplies for Fort Richardson, Fort Griffin, and Fort Concho, they rolled forward, unaware of the storm brewing to the north. At the same time, roughly 150 Kiowa warriors, joined by a handful of Comanche fighters, moved south from their reservation in Oklahoma. Leading them were 3 towering figures: Satanta, a fierce warrior and chief; Say-Tank, a seasoned medicine man and combat veteran; and Ado-Ite, a respected tribal leader. Their initial plan focused on crossing the Red River safely to reach another reservation, but beneath that goal simmered a deeper intent. Years of U.S. encroachment on their lands and the bitter clashes of the Texas Indian Wars had fueled a hunger for retaliation. The tension thickened as the Kiowa and Comanche scouts spotted an opportunity. Hunkered in the brush, they watched General William T. Sherman, a towering military name, lead an inspection party of 18 through the Texas plains. The warriors held back, not out of fear, but calculation. A shaman named Menanti had spoken. A larger, richer target would soon follow. His words carried weight, and the group waited. On May 18th, Warren's wagons crossed paths with Sherman's entourage along the Jaboro-Belknap Road. Less than an hour later, near Salt Creek Crossing, the air shattered with war cries. Satanta and his 150 fighters surged from cover, overwhelming the wagon train in a lightning assault. Arrows sliced through the chaos, mules brayed in panic, and the crack of gunfire answered the attack. Within minutes, 7 of Warren's 12 men lay dead, their blood soaking the dirt. 3 Kiowa warriors fell too, caught in the fray. The wagons, brimming with goods, became plunder as the attackers stripped them bare. 5 survivors, led by Thomas Brazil, staggered away from the wreckage. For 20 grueling miles, they trekked to Fort Richardson, their boots kicking up dust and their minds racing with the shock of the ambush. When they arrived, Sherman stood waiting, already briefed on the slaughter. He didn't hesitate, ordering Colonel Ronald S. Mackenzie to hunt down the Kiowa leaders responsible. Meanwhile, Satanta and his band veered off course. Instead of crossing the Red River as planned, they swung toward Fort Sill, aiming to barter for extra rations. There, they met Lori Tatum, a government agent, and casually recounted their raid. Tatum wasted no time alerting Sherman. Soon, soldiers closed in, arresting Satanta, Say-Tank, and Ado-Ite on the spot. The captives faced a swift reckoning. Hauled to Fort Richardson for trial, their fates diverged fast. Say-Tank, defiant to the end, lunged for freedom during the transfer, only to fall under a hail of bullets from his guards. Satanta and Ado-Ite stood before the court, their death sentences handed down with cold efficiency. Yet the story twisted again. Texas Governor Edmund Davis, under pressure, commuted their punishment to life in prison. 2 years later, Kiowa Chief Guipago negotiated their release, a rare victory in a losing war. Freedom didn't last. Satanta returned to the fight, driven by the destruction of the bison herds and the erosion of his people's sovereignty, only to land back in chains before the decade closed. Ado-Ite chose a quieter path, retreating home, but he too found himself behind bars again by 1879. This single clash near Salt Creek Crossing exposed a brutal truth. The Kiowa didn't strike blindly. Their attack blended strategy with a shaman's foresight, turning a supply run into a statement of resistance. Sherman's near miss underscored the fragility of U.S. control in the region, where military might clash with a native resolve hardened by betrayal. The raid's aftermath rippled beyond the battlefield, revealing a justice system quick to punish but reluctant to address the deeper wounds of conquest. For Warren's men, it was a job turned deadly. For the Kiowa, a fleeting triumph in a fight they couldn't win. The frontier, often cast as a land of promise, showed itself as a proving ground for survival, where every wagon wheel turned on the edge of violence. A few years earlier, another group of travelers would face their own brutal test. Half a decade before Warren's wagons rolled, the Kelly and Larimer families set out from Kansas, chasing a dream that would unravel along a Wyoming creek. Their story, like Warren's, began with hope and ended in blood. In the summer of 1864, two families from eastern Kansas loaded their wagons and headed west, chasing new lives. Josiah and Fanny Kelly led their group. Their 7-year-old adopted daughter Mary, two recently freed black assistants named Andy and Franklin Sullivan, and a wiry drifter, Garter Wakefield, who'd hitched along. Their 4 wagons carried 1.5 tons of flour in burlap sacks, half a ton of coffee beans in crates, half a ton of dried apples and peaches, 45 gallons of whiskey in oak barrels, plus clothes, tools, and cooking pots. Trailing behind came 25 calves and 50 dairy cows, stock for a Montana Territory ranch. The Larimers joined them, William and Sarah, their 8-year-old son Frank, with his mop of brown hair, and Noah Daniel Taylor, a broad-shouldered driver hired for his steady reins. Sarah, a commercial photographer, packed glass plates, a bulky camera, and bottles of collodion, aiming to open a studio in the mining camps of Virginia City and Bannock. As they hit the Oregon Trail, Andrew Sharp, a Methodist preacher nearly blind from cataracts, joined, his voice raspy with zeal to spread Christianity westward. The group pushed west until they branched north from the Oregon Trail into what's now Wyoming. By July 1864, they camped near Little Box Elder Creek, a narrow waterway fringed with cottonwoods. Josiah unhooked the mules, Fanny stacked supplies, and Sarah sorted her gear. The U.S. government had little contact with the region's native tribes then. No treaties secured these routes. The Oglala Lakota, who called this path the Holy Road, bristled as settlers crossed their hunting grounds. A band of 80 to 100 Oglala, led by warriors seasoned in tribal skirmishes, heard of the white travelers and rode in to investigate. The Sioux valued kinship with all beings, and this meeting began peacefully. Josiah handed out sugar chunks, Fanny sliced bread, and Noah offered tobacco twists. The Oglala, faces painted with red ochre, lingered, chatting in low tones. When they returned later, still friendly, the settlers cooked a feast, salt pork in pans, cornbread over the fire, for over 100 guests. Noah had written home a week earlier, his letter calm. No danger loomed from nearby tribes. That peace collapsed the next night. A Sioux rider galloped up to the Oglala, breathless with news that turned their mood dark. U.S. soldiers along the Missouri River had raided a native village, killing dozens, severing heads from the fallen, kin to these warriors, and mounting them on stakes. Rage replaced the prior night's laughter. Revenge took hold. Back at camp, the Kellys and Larimers, unaware of the distant slaughter, packed for the next leg. Fanny folded blankets, Josiah sharpened an axe, and Sarah cleaned her camera lenses, their talk focused on the trail ahead. Then gunfire cracked the quiet. Arrows whistled, thudding into wagon sides. The Oglala charged, war cries bouncing off the creek banks. Franklin Sullivan spun toward the sound, dropping with an arrow in his chest. Andrew Sharp stumbled, hands raised, before a bullet cut him down. Noah Taylor reached for his whip, but a warrior's club smashed his skull mid-stride. The camp dissolved into shouts and splintering wood. Josiah ducked into sagebrush, vanishing as his heart pounded. The others scattered, Fanny clutching Mary, Sarah dragging Frank. A second wagon train, a day behind, crested a hill and saw the chaos. Their scout, a lanky man with binoculars, peered down, then fell with an arrow in his throat. The rest whipped their mules around, retreating fast. The Oglala tore into the wreckage. Flour sacks split, spilling across the dirt. They hacked crates open, scooping coffee and fruit onto their ponies. Whiskey barrels rolled free, some smashed for quick gulps, others tied to saddles. Clothes, tools, and Sarah's camera piled into a bonfire, the smoke acrid and thick. 4 captives emerged from the dust: Fanny Kelly, gripping Mary's hand; Sarah Larimer, shielding Frank. Warriors bound their wrists with rawhide, dragging them off as the herd scattered. This wasn't chance. The Missouri Massacre had sparked a fury the settlers couldn't predict, and their hospitality meant nothing against that grief. The Oglala saw every white face as part of their losses, and Little Box Elder Creek became their reckoning. Fanny and Mary stumbled with their captors, but the girl slipped free in the scramble. She darted toward the creek, hiding among reeds. For days she crept along the banks, her dress torn, stomach empty, 3 U.S. Cavalrymen scouting nearby spotted her shadow in the brush, rifles ready. Wary of a trap, they circled but held back. By morning, she'd vanished. A passing settler group found her body near Powder River, scalp gone, 6 arrows in her chest. Sarah and Frank's captivity lasted 2 days. A young Oglala, uneasy with the raid's fallout, cut their bonds at night and pointed them to Deer Creek. They staggered into the trading post, filthy and shaken, where William waited, his face tight with relief. Fanny's ordeal stretched 5 months. Fed scraps, moved between camps, she held on while Josiah, back in Kansas, hired native allies to search, their efforts fruitless. In the winter of 1865, Blackfoot Sioux, seeking peace with the Oglala, negotiated her release. U.S. troops from Fort Sully escorted her back, a deal nudged by Chief Sitting Bull's nod that her detention risked wider conflict. In February 1865, Fanny rejoined Josiah in Ellsworth, Kansas, where they opened a small hotel, its wooden sign creaking above the door. Josiah's health failed by July 1867, a fever taking him, leaving Fanny, 8 months pregnant, to fend for herself. She moved to Sherman Station in Wyoming, where Sarah ran her photography shop, glass plates behind the counter. The women planned to write their stories, but tension flared when Sarah published Fanny's stolen draft as her own. A lawsuit followed, settled quietly with a payout Fanny kept private. Their broken trust mirrored the trail's broader clash. Settlers and natives trapped in cycles of goodwill and violence, each blind to the other's tipping point. The Oglala raid showed how fast alliances could fracture, fueled by distant atrocities neither side fully understood. Years earlier, another wagon train rolled into that unforgiving frontier. In 1860, the Utter and Van Ornum families left Wisconsin for Oregon, their hopes crushed in a massacre that would scar the Oregon Trail's history. Like the Kellys and Larimers, they began with ambition, only to meet despair in the dust. In May 1860, 2 groups of settlers from southern Wisconsin hitched their wagons and set out for Oregon's Willamette Valley, lured by fertile land and a fresh start. The Van Ornum family rolled first, followed a month later by the Utters, who caught up on June 5th in Omaha, Nebraska. Together they formed a caravan. 18 men, 5 women, over 20 children, 12 wagons packed with flour, salt pork and tools, and a herd of cattle trailing behind. The men, farmers and laborers like Elijah Utter and Lewis Lawson, checked their rifles, while women like Abigail Utter and the Van Ornum matriarch mended clothes and rationed supplies. The kids, ranging from toddlers to teens, jostled in the wagon beds. With the Oregon Trail stretching ahead, the combined Utter Van Ornum train pushed west, their wheels cutting ruts into the prairie. By August 21st, after 2.5 months, they reached Fort Hall in Idaho, a dusty outpost manned by U.S. troops. The original 34 travelers had grown to 40, picking up a deserter named Charles Chaffee and 5 ex-soldiers, hardened men with faded uniforms and sharp eyes. The group camped for days, repairing axles and trading for salt with passing trappers. On August 29th, they rolled out, joined by 22 soldiers assigned as an escort. 6 days later, near Twin Falls, the commander, fed up with the settlers' slow pace and constant bickering, turned his men back to Fort Hall. Undeterred, the wagon train pressed on. By September 8th, they reached Castle Creek, just miles from the Oregon border, now down to 8 wagons after 4 broke apart on the rocky trail. 4 more stragglers, lone travelers with packs and rifles, linked up, swelling the ranks to 44. Trouble struck that night. As the settlers slept, a small band of natives, likely Shoshone or Bannock, slipped into camp and drove off a dozen cattle, their hooves muffled by the dirt. The next morning, Elijah Utter counted the losses, shrugged, and signaled to move on. Hours later, a larger group of warriors surrounded them, whooping and spurring their horses to scatter the herd. The settlers reacted fast. Men grabbed rifles, women pulled children behind the wagons, and within minutes they formed a tight circle around the remaining stock. Lewis Lawson stepped forward, offering sacks of flour and a tin of tobacco. The natives took the goods, nodded, and rode off. The exchange brought a tense peace, and the train lurched northwest again. Relief didn't last. A mile later, a second wave of attackers hit, arrows slicing the air, gunfire popping. Lewis Lawson crumpled with a bullet in his gut. Two ex-soldiers, William Utley and Charles Kell, fell next, their bodies sprawled beside a splintered wagon. The survivors rallied, returning fire, and pushed forward. On September 10, another assault came. Judson Creasy, a Van Ornum man with a thick beard, took an arrow to the neck and toppled from his horse. The group abandoned the last of the cattle and 4 more wagons, piling goods onto the remaining 4 to distract the pursuers. It bought time, but not safety. A third attack followed, fiercer than the last. John Mears, a wiry settler, and Elijah Utter went down under a barrage of arrows and clubs. Abigail Utter screamed, refusing to leave her husband's side. She and their 4 children, aged 3 to 12, huddled by his body as the others fled. The family of 6 vanished into the chaos, never reaching Oregon. The survivors split. Jacob and Joseph Utter, brothers with sharp jaws and quick tempers, bolted with 3 soldiers, Privates Theodore Murdoch and Henry Snyder, and Sergeant Charles Schamberg, plus the deserter Chaffee. They grabbed rifles, ammo, and horses, racing east. Murdoch and Schamberg didn't make it far. Native scouts caught them in a gully, leaving their bodies riddled with arrows. The remaining 27 settlers, men, women, and children, huddled near the Snake River, down to scraps of food and a few guns scavenged from the wreckage. Hunger gnawed at them. On September 17th, Goodell Masson and Christopher Trimble, 2 lean men with sunken eyes, volunteered to find help, striking out alone. The others found a dying cow, slaughtered it, and divided the meat. 5 days later, on September 22nd, Emerson and Trimble stumbled onto Jacob, Joseph, and Chaffee, who'd killed a horse for food. Trimble hauled a hunk of meat back to the main group, arriving as they bartered with a Shoshone band. The settlers offered their last rifles for food, but the warriors, wary of armed whites, seized the weapons instead. Trimble, thinking fast, handed himself over as a hostage to secure more supplies. He vanished with the Shoshone. His body turned up a month later on October 24th, scalped and stiff in a ravine. Death closed in on the rest. Some wandered off, seeking rescue, only to fall to arrows or knives. 3 Van Ornum girls, aged 10, 12, and 14, and their brother Reuben, a wiry 9-year-old, were taken captive. The girls starved by 1861, their bodies found brittle in a Shoshone camp. Reuben survived, discovered alive in November 1862 by California volunteers. The Shoshone claimed he was a chief's nephew, not Reuben, but the soldiers dismissed it, hauling him to Oregon. He never adjusted, leaving his uncle's home in 1870 to rejoin the tribe that had raised him. Back at the river, the stranded 25 ate their dead as children succumbed to hunger. 4 perished in a week, their flesh carved off by desperate hands. On October 24th, after 45 days, Captain Frederick T. Dent and his Fort Walla Walla Relief Force found 10 survivors at a site dubbed Starvation Camp, gaunt, hollow-eyed, clinging to life. Jacob and Joseph had reached the Umatilla Agency, guiding Dent to rescue Masson and Chaffee near Burnt River, barely conscious from starvation. The Utter Van Ornum train's fate wasn't mere bad luck. The Shoshone and Bannock struck not just for cattle, but to push back against settlers flooding their lands without consent. The soldiers' abandonment at Twin Falls left the group exposed, a choice reflecting the U.S. military's strained reach in 1860. Survival turned settlers into scavengers, their cannibalism a grim echo of the frontier's cost. Like Warren's raid and the Kelly-Larimer ambush, this clash showed a pattern. Native resistance met settler ambition with blood, each side driven by needs the other couldn't fathom. The utter Van Ornum massacre capped a violent chapter in the West's expansion, joining the Warren Raid and Kelly Larimer tragedy as stark lessons. Each clash revealed a brutal truth. Settlers chased dreams, natives fought for survival, and neither could bridge the divide. Blood stained the trails, marking a frontier where ambition collided with resistance, leaving scars that shaped the land and its people for decades.